Barron Trump faces a school showdown. What he did next left everyone speechless. What would you do if the whole world believed you were nothing more than the shadow of your family? Being born into power is a privilege, but it can also be a curse. Barron Trump, the youngest son of the former US president, is never judged for who he is, only for the name he carries. They call him the White House Prince, the Silver Spoon Kid, someone who could never succeed without his family's influence. But when challenged, when cornered by doubt and ridicule, Barron does not make excuses, he fights back. This is not just a battle of wits between wealthy kids at a prestigious school. This is a fight to earn real recognition through intelligence, determination, and his own merits. Barron Trump stepped through the grand doors of Montclair Academy, one of the most prestigious private schools in the US, where only the children of the ultra-rich, powerful, or exceptionally gifted could set foot. Though he had been studying here for some time, every step he took still attracted stares, curious, judgmental, and full of speculation. Montclair Academy was unlike any other school. Here, no one cared who you were outside these walls. Son of a president? Grandson of a billionaire? None of that mattered. This place was a brutal battleground of intellect, status, and social dominance. If you couldn't prove yourself, others would crush you in this ruthless game. As Barron walked through the grand hall, whispers filled the air. Who does he think he is? Just another kid living off his family's money. There's no way he's smarter than us. Barron sighed. He had heard it all before. Settling into a chair at the library, he pulled out a book on quantum physics that he had been studying. But before he could focus, a familiar voice rang out. Well, look who it is. Our White House prince still pretending to be a genius. Barron looked up. Richard Wallace stood before him, smirking. The son of a famous tech billionaire, Richard wasn't just rich, he was also highly intelligent. But his most dangerous trait was his ability to manipulate people and make others feel small. You must be reading that just to look smart, Richard scoffed. Who would believe you actually understand any of this? Or are you just waiting for a call from Daddy to fix everything for you? Laughter erupted from the surrounding students. Barron studied Richard for a moment before calmly setting his book down. That's what you think? Barron asked, his voice steady. Of course. Everyone here knows you're just a name, nothing more. How interesting, Barron tilted his head. Then how about a little intellectual challenge? Just to see if I really am as incapable as you assume. The challenge in Barron's tone made Richard pause, but he quickly regained his confidence. Oh, are you challenging me? Fine, but don't cry when you lose. The crowd murmured in excitement. Barron simply smiled. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone, but sometimes certain people needed to be put in their place. News of the showdown between Barron Trump and Richard Wallace quickly spread across Montclair Academy. The school was already home to some of the brightest minds among America's next generation, but anything involving the name Trump was always taken to another level. For many, this was just a contest between two top students. But for Richard Wallace, this was his chance to crush Barron's reputation, to prove that he was nothing more than just a name. Inside the school cafeteria, Richard sat surrounded by a group of elite students: Bradley Carter, son of a senator, Jessica Monroe, daughter of an oil conglomerate CEO, and a few others. Barron thinks he can compete with me, Richard scoffed, tapping his fingers on the table. Bradley smirked. He thinks just being born into the Trump family makes him capable of anything. That's hilarious. Jessica giggled. I bet he just wants to put on a show. Richard leaned back in his chair, a glint of malice in his eyes. I won't just defeat him, I'll humiliate him. The murmurs weren't just limited to Richard's circle. Throughout the entire day, Barron noticed the scrutinizing glances in the hallways, the whispered comments, the sidelong glances as he walked past. Even Professor Albertson, one of the school's most esteemed lecturers, looked at him with a doubtful gaze when he walked into his political science class. Mr. Trump, the professor said slowly, I hear you're going up against Richard Wallace in a debate. Barron nodded. Professor Albertson furrowed his brows, scrutinizing him for a moment before shrugging. I hope you're well prepared. Our school has no place for those who rely on family name and reputation. A cold sensation ran down Barron's spine. It wasn't just the students, even the faculty doubted him. I understand, Barron responded, his voice calm but his eyes sharp. I also don't have the habit of relying on anyone but myself. Professor Albertson raised an eyebrow, seemingly surprised by the answer, but he said nothing more. While Barron quietly prepared for the debate, Richard was far from idle. He secretly approached Professor Holloway, the faculty member overseeing the competition, with a friendly yet calculated smile. You know, Richard said, Barron may be famous, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's actually talented. Professor Holloway peered at him over his glasses. What are you implying? Richard shrugged. It would be a shame if someone undeserving got ahead of those who truly have merit. I just think we should test him a little. No further words were needed. Professor Holloway got the message. A plan was set in motion. The next day, as Barron walked into class, he was informed of a surprise exam scheduled right before the debate. It was an extremely difficult test, designed to rob him of his final preparation time. Looking at the test paper on his desk, Barron could feel the setup behind it, but instead of panicking, he simply smirked. So this is how they play their game. But Richard wasn't done yet. He took things even further. Through a discreet arrangement, he managed to get his hands on the list of debate topics beforehand. Richard strolled into his practice room with his group, holding the list, and chuckled. He won't even know what hit him. Are you sure? Jessica asked, a hint of hesitation in her voice. If we get caught? No one will find out, Richard cut her off. And even if they do, who's going to believe Barron? He'll just look like a sore loser making excuses. Bradley laughed. This is going to be an easy win. The group laughed along with him. They believed the outcome was already decided. That night, instead of panicking, Barron spent the evening in the library, deeply focused on his research. Ethan Reynolds, one of the few loyal friends he had, sneaked in, his face full of concern. Barron, you need to know this. I overheard some of Richard's people. He got the debate topics in advance. Barron looked up from his book, completely unfazed. I know, he replied simply. Ethan's eyes widened. You know? Barron closed his book and leaned back in his chair. Did you think I wouldn't anticipate this? Ethan blinked. So, what are you going to do? Barron remained silent for a moment before replying, his gaze sharp. I'm going to make him play fair, whether he wants to or not. The grand auditorium of Montclair Academy was packed. The golden chandeliers reflected light off the oak-panelled walls, creating an atmosphere of elegance and pressure. The debate between Barron Trump and Richard Wallace had become the most anticipated event of the semester. From the audience, whispers filled the air. Some were eager to see Richard crush Barron, while others were simply curious whether the White House prince was actually intelligent or just a shadow of his father. In the judges' row, Professor Holloway sat with a blank expression, showing no emotion. He appeared neutral, but Barron knew better. This match was already rigged. Taking a deep breath, Barron steadied himself. They could play dirty, but that didn't mean he was going to lose. Richard stood confidently in the center, his smug smile unwavering. He had memorized every argument, prepared every counterpoint. To him, Barron was nothing more than a lamb walking into a slaughterhouse. The rules of the debate were simple. The judges would randomly select a topic. Each side had 30 seconds to prepare. Whoever presented the most convincing argument winning over the judges and audience would emerge victorious. But the real issue was, the random topic had already been chosen in Richard's favor. Professor Holloway stepped onto the stage, holding the envelope that contained the debate question. Today's debate topic is, can individuals born into wealth and power ever truly succeed on their own merit? The auditorium erupted in murmurs. Barron wasn't surprised. He had expected this. Richard wanted him backed into a corner. He stood across from Richard on the stage, under the scrutiny of hundreds of spectators. He had 30 seconds to prepare. The room was silent, but the air was thick with doubt. There's no way he can win this. He can't argue against this without humiliating himself. Richard is going to destroy him. Richard smirked, his eyes brimming with confidence. The entire auditorium held its breath as Richard began his argument. Ladies and gentlemen, he started smoothly, we all know that some people in this society are born with greater advantages than others. And in history, there has never been a clearer example of this than Barron Trump. Some of the audience chuckled. Richard continued, his words like daggers. He has everything: money, power, connections. But ask yourself, if he were born into an ordinary family, would he have accomplished anything he has today? I think not. The audience erupted into applause. Richard glanced at Barron with a triumphant expression. Now, I'm very curious to hear how he plans to argue against this, Richard smirked. Because if he claims he is successful purely by merit, well, that would be laughable. All eyes turned to Barron. Everyone was waiting to see him crumble. But Barron remained calm. He slowly stepped forward, locking eyes with Richard. After a few moments of silence, he finally spoke. But the moment he opened his mouth, the entire auditorium fell silent. Richard, you claim that if I hadn't been born into a wealthy family, I would have achieved nothing, Barron asked calmly. Richard smirked. Exactly. Barron nodded and took a few slow steps across the stage, as if deep in thought. That's interesting. He locked eyes with Richard. Then can you explain why so many people born into wealthy families still fail miserably? The atmosphere grew heavy. Richard frowned slightly. Do you think money can buy success? Barron continued. Then let me ask you the opposite question. If money is everything, why are there wealthy people who end up with nothing? No one spoke. Barron turned his gaze to the audience. Success is not inherited, it is created. Some heads in the crowd began to nod. Barron continued. Richard is right about one thing. I was born into a powerful family. But power does not define who I am. I did not choose where I was born, but I can choose how I live. Barron turned back to Richard. You say that I cannot succeed without my family's reputation, but I am not here today to defend the Trump name. I am here to prove that every individual, regardless of where they come from, has the right to create their own value. A small round of applause echoed through the room. Richard was starting to feel the pressure. And if you truly believe I have no real ability, then instead of just talking, why don't I prove it? Barron pulled out a stack of documents and slammed them onto the table in front of Richard. This is a research paper I've been working on for the past 3 months on artificial intelligence technology. No one helped me. Not my father, not money. Just me. Richard's face paled. And what about you, Richard? Barron's voice sharpened. If you didn't have your family's backing, would you even be standing here today? The entire auditorium exploded into applause. Barron Trump stood there, calm and composed in the middle of a packed auditorium. His final words seemed to linger in the air. Next to him, Richard Wallace was frozen. His hands unconsciously clenched the edge of the table, his face burning with humiliation and anger. For years, Richard had been the one controlling the game. He had money, connections, and the ability to manipulate people. But for the first time in his life, he had been completely exposed in front of everyone. At first, no one spoke, but then, a slow, scattered applause began, then quickly spread throughout the entire hall. And within seconds, the auditorium erupted in cheers and applause. Barron didn't bow, didn't gloat. He simply stood still, letting the recognition speak for itself. From the judges' panel, Principal Montgomery, a powerful and strict figure at Montclair Academy, slowly stood up. Barron Trump, he said, his deep voice carrying weight, you have just done something that very few people can do, not only winning a debate, but changing an entire perception. The applause grew louder. I once doubted you, the principal continued, but today, you have proven that you are not just the Trump name, you are an individual with real ability. Barron only gave a slight nod, his eyes sharp yet calm as always. In the distance, Professor Albertson, who had once questioned him, simply sat in silence, deep in thought. He said nothing, but in his heart, he had his answer. Meanwhile, Richard Wallace remained motionless, his jaw clenched. He had lost. And worse, he had lost in the most humiliating way in front of everyone. The moment Richard left the auditorium, he immediately sought out Professor Holloway, the man who had helped him cheat. "We can't let this end like this," he hissed. "I want him taken down." Professor Holloway frowned. "What are you suggesting?" Richard leaned in and whispered. A plan was quickly put into motion. The next day, an anonymous letter appeared on the school's notice board, accusing Barron of cheating in the debate. The rumor spread like wildfire. Some students immediately questioned it. No way. Barron doesn't need to cheat. But what if it's true? I mean, he is a Trump. Richard's circle whispered among themselves, hopeful. If Barron is caught cheating, he'll be ruined instantly. But then, a formal investigation was launched. Principal Montgomery, along with several judges from the debate, reviewed all the evidence. And the result? Richard Wallace was the real cheater. Everything was exposed. He had received the debate topics in advance. He had used connections to manipulate teachers. Most importantly, he had deliberately spread false accusations about Barron. It was all laid bare before the entire school. Professor Holloway was suspended. Richard Wallace was banned from all intellectual competitions at Montclair Academy. But the worst part, his reputation was destroyed. As Richard walked out of the principal's office, every student in the hallway looked at him with contempt. The same people who once laughed at Barron, who once sided with Richard, now turned their backs on him. So he was the one relying on his family's power all along. "I used to think he was smart, but turns out he's just a fraud." Richard kept his head down and walked away in silence. After the truth was revealed, many people approached Barron to apologize, including Professor Albertson. "I was wrong about you," he admitted. "You're not just intelligent, you have real integrity." Barron simply nodded. He never went online to gloat, never sought revenge against Richard. He just continued his work studying, researching, and proving himself through his achievements. Ethan Reynolds walked up and patted him on the shoulder. "You won in the best way possible." Barron looked out the window, sunlight streaming into the campus. "You know something, Ethan," he said calmly. "I was never competing to defeat Richard. I was competing to prove one thing." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Barron smiled. "That no one decides my worth except me." Ethan chuckled. "That sounds like something a politician would say." Barron simply shrugged. He had nothing more to say because the debate that mattered was already over. A person's worth is not determined by where they are born, but by how they live. Barron Trump did not need his family's name to prove himself. He used intelligence and resilience to earn recognition. True victory is not about tearing others down, it's about surpassing yourself. He didn't need revenge against Richard or validation from those who doubted him. He let his success speak for itself. And in the end, never let anyone define your worth. Let your actions, your intellect, and your character be the only answer that matters.